So moving away from tides and over to little g, which is a centripetal force, not a centrifugal force. You say that it's a very small difference between what we experience at the equator and what we would experience at the pole if anybody were ever allowed to go there and measure it. The truth of the assertion here is that the globies are saying there is a 1.5% difference in your weight between 90 and 0 degrees latitude. Okay, that brings us over to the GNOME project, which you should look into, GNOME, which took place around 2011, 2012. People got it up and took their little scale with their calibrated weight, and they tried to keep the ambient situation the same location to location with respect to temperature and humidity and radiative influx and la air pressure. And they found out that no, they had, like you say, produced predictions based on mathematical analysis and what they think the measurements will turn out to be. And even NASA put out that expectation in an incorrectly built chart that shows straight lines instead of cosine derived lines of expectation of your weight. Those do not coincide with the measurements taken during 2011 and 2012. There were a dozen or two measurements taken. They do not show any congruency there. The curves are quite different. So on top of that, let's look at what would happen in the real world if there really was a 1.5% difference in your weight between the equator and the pole. Companies, corporations, factions like the entire De Beers family, everybody in precious metals, those people, those corporations, those economic interests would have long ago set up properties on the equator where that's where they buy, and far from the equator, up in the Scandinavian area of Earth, perhaps, where they sell the same material, and they're going to score a 40 extra 1.25% on their money. This is an opportunity that people like that would not ignore. You would see a massive paradigm in this department, that there would be corporations all over Earth with dual property setups where they buy on the equator and they sell elsewhere and fleece the public. And they wouldn't say a word about it, except that we would see locations where they've bought properties and that's what they're doing. We would see the economic trail. It doesn't exist, and it is because it's a lie, Franco. Now, let's deal with this 1.5% thing on two levels. There's the g, the little g difference that you're citing with latitude, but what about the rotational spin and adding the vector against our revolutional velocity? Okay, now the thing is, Franco, that the whole time I was listening to you speak, you quantified nothing. And I would like to, just to take all the mystery out of this, all the sleight of hand out of this, and look at the apples as apples, okay? So when we talk about our orbit around the sun, all the globies, NASA, everybody's asserting there's a rough figure, a rule of thumb figure of 30,000 meters per second, 30 kilometers per second, that the entire Earth, regardless of its rotational rate, that it's revolving, it's blasting through space around the sun, and we're going to use the sun as the inertial reference frame in this analysis, okay? I don't want to get any more complex than that. Are you with me, Franco?
I am.
You're following. Okay, so we've established the 30 kilometers per second, the entire Earth, regardless of which orientation it's doing, it's blowing around the sun. Well, if we talk about the 15 degrees per hour and the alleged radius of 3959 miles of the Earth, that equates to, back into the metrics, 450 meters per second going around the equator, right? Okay, well, simple vector addition. Forget about fourth order derivational calculus. We just don't need to go that far. All we need to do is some simple vector addition here. When we take the 30,000 and now we bring our perspective to the surface at the equator, in the Globee model, there's an extra 450 meters per second you are supposedly going because of the rotational spin on top of the orbital movement. That is 1.5%. Yet again, just like the G variation with latitude, we're looking at a difference or a relation of 450 meters per second versus 30,000 meters per second. Now, the thing is, when you're on the outside of this equation, farthest from the sun, spinning with the Earth, you're doing 30,450 meters per second. Simple addition. 12 hours later, you're doing 30,000 minus 450 meters per second. You're doing 29,550 meters per second. That's a 3% difference in your velocity. Okay, so when you look at the absolute figures yet again, if you spend 6 hours going from 30,000 to 30,450, you've increased your speed in 6 hours by Mach 1.3, right? That is an acceleration of 2.1 centimeters per second for those 12 hours, actually, because you're going from 0 to the 6-hour point to the 12-hour point where you're actually doing entirely full swing, the opposite velocity. Now, you're telling me, Franco, that in the century, the decade, the year that we live in today, where science is so incredibly advanced, we have all of these pieces of equipment. We have interferometers, magnetometers, gravimeters, all the rest of them that we've dreamt up in our scientific path here in learning about the truth. You're telling me that we don't have the ability to measure a change in our own velocity at the equator to the extent of 2.1 centimeters per second squared? That's a lie, Franco. It's not that we can't feel it. It's not that we can't measure it because it's so tiny. When we take the figures asserted by NASA, by the Globies, that are in every geophysics textbook you've ever held on to, and we actually apply them to the formulae that you were forced to regurgitate and use and demonstrate you know how to use in class, when you actually look at the real figures, the lie is plainly and irrefutably revealed. So, Franco, I invite you to go and finally do your homework. Do the digging. Stop injecting dogma-stuffed assumption into your analysis. You're real good at kinematics, Franco, but in the dynamics department, you are sadly lacking. And I'm hoping that the past 4 points I've made highlights that enough to convince you to go and do your homework.
Can I reply?
Well, when I stop speaking like that for a long time, that's the signal.
Yeah, feel free, Franco. Go ahead. I hope you took some notes too, but if you don't need them, that's all.
Right. If you're on
Right,
an
but
equator,
that's not G, that's outward.
I never said that G is centrifugal.
Okay, when we play back the recording, that is what we will hear. And I have one more point, Franco, and it is for the benefit.
Can I
No,
speak?
this is important. This is important, Franco. It is for the benefit of those who are not as educated as you and I. It is for the benefit of the people who are going a little more on feel here. And what they're doing in terms of their level analysis is they're listening to you construct sentences and how long it takes you to construct a single sentence. How many times in a single sentence you stop, stutter, pick another word, think, decide something else needs to be emphasized instead. Make sure you got it right. I understand. No, Franco, hold on. I get to speak here for a sec. I'll let you know.
Okay, so to be fair, Stone, Franco does have a language barrier, so I don't think that's his choice. English is not his first language, so to discuss the physicists at this high level in his second, third, fourth language is something that we are not going to shame him for. I want you guys to both be able to get your thoughts out, so don't interrupt each other, but let each other talk. Sorry.
I was actually about to give him that point, Proud. I was about to say, look, I understand that English is a second language for you. I totally get that. I commiserate. I have to speak Spanish where I live here. I learned French in my previous life. I totally understand the nature of that beast. However, it doesn't explain all of the problems we're hearing in your speech here. It doesn't explain your tone of voice, the urgency in how you're saying it. Maybe you should just take a chill pill a little bit and think harder before you put the whole sentence together for us, so that it is easier to deliver to us in a way that we're going to fully understand what you're saying and not lose track of what you're talking about mid-sentence. But I don't think that handles all of the issue here. Okay, in terms of what the people who are not educated are hearing in what you're saying, in how you're saying it. You can't ignore that.
Okay, Franco, you got the floor. Uninterrupted, guys. Let's hear
Yeah,
what
yeah.
Franco
Let
got.
him respond. Even if he says something, then just let Franco respond. He's earned that.
Okay, so again, you can listen to the recording. I'm sorry for my pauses and everything, but when I said when you talk about g, little g, okay, little g is the force, and little g, well, as acceleration due to the gravitational force, and it's centripetal. The inertial force due to the non-inertiality of the frame is called centrifugal and is outwards. The sum of the two, g directed towards the center of the Earth and the centrifugal force directed towards the outside with respect to the rotation axis, which is called centrifugal, is the g prime, if you want to call it. The sum of the two vectors is still mostly centripetal. But it's not exactly direct towards the center of the Earth, because the two vectors, the centrifugal and the centripetal, are not directed along the same direction. One is perpendicular to the axis, the other one is directed toward the center. And apart from, and if you're not at the equator, these two vectors are not parallel. So you make a sum of two vectors. So one is centripetal, the other one is centrifugal. I never said that G is centripetal, okay? But I don't want to discuss this. Second point, the tides. Yes, you have two peaks during the day, and this is precisely what is computable using the difference between centrifugal and gravity. This is what I learned this in high school. We made the calculation. You make the calculation, and it's perfectly symmetrical. To first you expand the difference between two forces to first non-zero order, and you see that the effect is perfectly symmetrical on the two sides where the moon is, and on the opposite side, and with a perfectly symmetrical effect. That is the tidal force. I'm sorry, but it's exactly what is predicted, that you have two peaks during every so not one but two, and you have another peak on the opposite side with respect to where the moon is. So this is the other thing. As to the motion composition, you are accusing me of not using dynamics. I'm sorry, but I have a different definition of what is dynamics and what is kinematics. And I have to say that your argument is purely kinematics, because your argument is vector composition of velocities. And I assure you that acceleration is linear, is a linear function. So you can
You can measure it,
superimpose. Yeah, you can measure it, but you can superimpose two motions.
but we don't.
If you have a bicycle wheel rotating. The acceleration of a point on a bicycle, on the bicycle wheel, on a point of the point on the wheel, on the edge of the wheel. The bicycle is proceeding. The velocity goes from 0 when the point is touching the ground to twice the velocity of the bike when it's on top. The acceleration of the point is always towards the center of the wheel, and it's exactly the same as if the bike was stationary.
Franco,
This is simple kinematics. I'm sorry.
acceleration is outward, not inward.
This is calculation. I'm sorry. You would fail my exam because this is very simple kinematics of rotation plus translation, plus shift, whatever you call it. It's wrong. The acceleration does not change if a body is rotating and moving with constant velocity. The acceleration is exactly the same as if it was stationary and rotating. You just added velocities, not accelerations. If you add accelerations, you see that you add the centripetal acceleration to nothing because the translation motion has no acceleration. So
Let me disprove that for you.
I'm sorry. It's on every textbook. It's not
Let me disprove
regurgitation.
that for you.
It's computation. It's derivation. It's differentiation of vectors. This is vector algebra and differentiation and definition of velocity and acceleration. I'm sorry.
Let me disprove that for you.
No.
So you're not willing to listen to me.
I,
You don't want to hear it.
I want to see the computation. It's on every textbook in physics.
This is an appeal to credential and an appeal to authority. You see the fallacy you're pointing out here? And you're hiding behind some kind of mathematical sleight of hand that really doesn't apply to what I'm talking about at all.
No, I'm sorry. What you said is completely wrong. It's wrong. You make calculations. You calculate it. You do it. You cannot do it with voice, right? You do it with vectors. You write it down. You write components if you want. If you can write it down, I can write it down for you. The adding a linear motion to a rotation does not change the acceleration. I'm sorry. This is very, very simple.
I can hear the heat in your voice, Franco, and to me it
Yeah,
sounds like
because if a student says this to me, I will throw him out with a kick.
yeah, what does that equate to? Draconian education?
Equating to not knowing and claiming you know kinematics when you actually don't. It's like claiming that 3 times 5 is 35, as Socrates says. If you say something which is
Gringo.
wrong at an exam, I will throw you out because I'm a professor. Yes, I am paid to assess if someone has knowledge. And if you clearly have it, no. This is it. This is it. The argument. I've seen that before. The argument is totally wrong. It's wrong. You just compute that. You take a rotational motion. You add a linear motion, and you compute the acceleration. It's exactly the same as if you didn't add the linear motion because you're adding something which has no acceleration, and acceleration is linear. You take motion A plus motion B. The acceleration is the acceleration of A plus the acceleration of B. If B is a linear motion, it has no acceleration, so the acceleration is exactly the same as A. It's linear.
Franco, let him explain why you're wrong. Don't just say no.
I was gonna ask if Franco would like Stone to steel man his position, so he doesn't think that he's misrepresenting him.
Then provide the rebuttal, please, Stone. I think this is a great build.
Sure, the steel man on his side is he's saying that you don't experience any change because the acceleration of the rotating body is unchanged. But the point is that he doesn't understand that what he needs to add together is the linear component of the rotational vector to the linear component of the revolutional vector. And that is how you get changes in velocity, which necessarily produce changes in acceleration. And the point is that the
No,
change
it
in
doesn't.
acceleration, see, you're
Franco,
interrupting
let
me.
him finish, Franco.
The point is that the change in acceleration is in terms of the sun as the inertial reference frame. And this is where you're hiding in the mathematics. You're working on an assumption that you're just dealing with the Earth as the inertial reference frame because we're on Earth and that's all that's important. But your analysis completely falls apart on that basis in your failure to address that a tangential movement equates to linear velocity, which you're going to be adding and subtracting to and from the linear orbital velocity of the body as a whole. It's too bad that you can't see this, Franco. It's about how you're really excellent at kinematics, but when it comes to dynamics and attributing
Part
cause
of the
to
dynamic,
superposing what? You're
doing
failing.
acceleration is by definition kinematics. Adding velocities and accelerations is by definition kinematics.
I didn't catch the end of that sentence. By definition, it's what?
Kinematics. Accelerations and velocities and their addition is kinematics by definition. You don't have any dynamics in it.
Yeah, the dynamics are where you're saying, oh no, we don't feel that acceleration because of this frame of reference and mathematical sleight of hand, this and that and the other thing
Yeah.
about how it's not related. And it is. The point is that you're just not observing the relation.
I was addressing the point of view, adding velocity at two different points on the equator at two different times because you're saying that you're basically adding vectorially a vector addition of the velocity of the Earth at two different points along the equator during the day, say, and adding this to the motion of the Earth around the Sun. This is simple addition of composition of motions, which is kinematics, and you compute the total acceleration, and I tell you that it is a sum, vector sum of the acceleration towards the center of the Earth and the acceleration towards the Sun. It's just the sum of the two. So if you can take them singly, separately, and you compute them, and you can add them afterwards if you want. But if they're both tiny, the sum will be tiny.
But they're not tiny. I already quantified them for you, and I said that one is 1.5% of the other, and that these are very easily measurable magnitudes given our level of science today. The problem is nobody seems to be able to measure it. Now let's get back to what your mathematical assumption is here about adding the vectors and that acceleration doesn't change. When we know that's flat out wrong with respect to the sun as the inertial reference frame. There is no avoiding the arithmetic simplicity of adding and subtracting 450 to and from 30,000. And that equates to changes in acceleration with respect to the sun's inertial frame. And we should indeed not only feel it, but be able to measure it. We should see it in bodies of water that are very expansive and maybe very shallow, but that doesn't matter either. The point is there'll be more mass to the water underneath, which is irrelevant. The point is that lakes, just as a starter, would be sloshing back and forth on a 12 and 24-hour cycle that we simply do not see based on this change in velocity, based on this change in net acceleration going around the sun. It is not apparent. It is not measurable. Nobody's ever seen it because it doesn't exist, Franco. And that's why I'm inviting you to just drop all of the dogma upon which you have built your career, just put it to the side for a while and do some objective digging. And when you do, you will see exactly what I'm talking about. And I would help you because the videos that I produce are all up on BitChute. There's about a dozen of them that I recommend you watch, one of them being the gravity kill shot, a couple of thoughts about the moon. And in that video, I obliterate Newtonian mechanics on the astronomical scale beyond refutability. When we look at the simple premise about forces and the G you love to talk about, the centripetal force, the one where the Earth has an attraction, allegedly, to the globies, to the moon. Okay, we're going to call that X. So the Earth has got a pull on the moon. There's a mass attracts mass thing going on there, and somehow that's causing the moon to orbit the Earth in a circular way. Well, actually, 11% out of perfectly circular. Okay, so the Earth and the moon have this mass attracts mass relationship going on. Well, what about the sun? Okay, you say there's one on the Earth. That's what produces this 30 kilometer per second orbital speed as they are imbalanced with each other. The centrifugal of the Earth wanting to fly away, the centripetal, the mass attracts mass of the sun. Let's apply that to the moon. When we look at the orders of magnitude here, that there is an attraction allegedly between the Earth and the moon. Well, what about the attraction between the sun and the moon? And when you do the math, when you take NASA's asserted figures that are up on their web pages, you find out, quantitatively speaking, that the attraction, the force of attraction between the sun and the moon is 2.2 times that of the Earth and the moon. Yet, at the same time, the moon's alleged orbital elliptical shape is only 11% out of perfectly circular and never seems to change. This is mathematically impossible using strict Newtonian mechanics on the astronomical scale. You guys have a lot of answering to do.
Can I answer this? Well, can I answer this? This big surprise that the force to was the moon, the force between the sun and the moon, and the force between the Earth and the moon, is the force due to the sun is bigger. It's not a surprise to me because guess what? I learned it in high school. My high school teacher actually derived the very same number you quoted to us. And
So you've chosen to ignore that all these years?
no, because the conclusion was, look, all the pictures, not on scale pictures that are on your textbooks, the geographic astronomic textbooks are wrong because they're not on scale. The picture depicting the path of the moon around the sun as a composition of the revolution around the Earth and the motion of the Earth around the sun, which is a wiggly, usually represented as a wiggly pattern, is wrong because due to the fact that the acceleration towards the sun is the force towards the sun is bigger than that towards the Earth. The path of the moon around the Earth is actually always curved towards the sun, which you can easily obtain by composing the two motions. It's not mathematically impossible. You do it if you do it in scale, and if you do it correctly, and not with approximate and very wrong drawings because they're not on scale. You will see that it's perfectly possible. It's perfectly
Interesting you
possible.
should say that, because I've also produced a video where I do indeed draw all of this to scale, including the sun's diameter. It's something like 750,000 miles in diameter, 93 million miles in radial distance between the Earth and Moon and the sun, as well as the, 240,000 miles between the Earth and the Moon. And the point here is that the force, allegedly, acting on the moon by the sun is static and does not change relative to any intermediate velocity in the reference frame. It's absolutely ludicrous to try and tell me that something has 2.2 times the pull on the body and somehow you're still going to find, and we observe, a nearly circular path of the moon allegedly around the Earth. It just doesn't add up. And I don't care what kind of mathematical derivation you want to draw on the board, it doesn't match observation and it doesn't match the numerical assertions by NASA and the rest of the people who put your textbooks together. If you really do your homework, Franco, if you really objectively dig, you're going to find you've been hoodwinked, along with the rest of us. We were all lied to, Franco. We just need to bring you up to par.
I don't agree, because I think instead that it's actually everything is explainable and described by the same mathematics that you
Okay,
don't like.
you don't agree. I will postulate because your career depends on it.
My career was not even dreamt of when I was in high school and I was taught this.
That is deflection. What would happen to your career, Franco, if you all of a sudden became one of us and started to tweet things that we tweet and start to point out the incongruities of what's been taught into your career?
If I can ask Franco a question about his bike analogy, can you elaborate in basic, concise for the audience specifically, why if spokes on a bike wheel are rotating, and why it would not be acceleration in the direction the bike is traveling, because said motion could be replicated in a stationary gym bicycle? Can you explain why it's not accelerating just because you can do it? Just seems like a non sequitur to me. You okay there, Franco? Oh boy. Stone, what have you done?
I think I broke his brain, and that's okay, guys. Sorry to break up the party. I kind of have that tendency. Maybe he'll come back later after he actually does his homework. Because it really got to me when he started to put the gavel down. When he started to say, "I would just toss you out of my class," and this whole draconian education technique is just far more than I can accept anymore. I've had it. You know what I'm saying? And he really did reveal himself, his mental state, his actual foundation, his mental foundation, where he came from to get to where he is now, rests on all of these incongruities, on all of these incorrect dynamic statements. And it's like the old adage that you cannot convince somebody of something upon which their career rests on not understanding it. You cannot make them understand it. They will not. And ego prevents. That's just the way it is, guys.
See,
Classic example.
I feel like I disagree. I feel like plenty of people have been in jobs, positions, schools, environments where they didn't want to be there. They didn't believe a single thing that was being told to them, but they were able to understand the material and give it back to them. Like, it's not like, you don't need to believe everything when you're in a field or a study or an environment. Like, you can, listen to it, take it in, and use this information when you're there, but you don't have to believe that this is actually accurate. And a lot of the Globers say that, like, we could never be pilots, we could never be this, and contractors, and because we don't believe in the globe. And it's like, that makes no sense. If I'm doing my job, I'm doing my job. I don't have to
Okay,
believe your propaganda to do the job properly.
but let's look at that act objectively just for a second, though, Prod. When you're talking about somebody, like you said, who, let's say the guy's a flat earther, knows the truth, did his homework, and is now looking at this incorrect curriculum, and he's going to take the paycheck to teach that curriculum to students. That, is it not the classic definition of academic fraud?
I've I To address your question directly, yeah, that is a fraudulent act for someone to do, knowing, to someone to be complacent and knowing that they don't believe this, but they're going to parrot it. But I feel like, would it be just as much as a dishonest to someone who is a land surveyor, or, and they go around knowing that they're supposed to believe the Earth is a globe, and they don't actually believe that to be true, and they just take the check? Like, same people who build the satellite technology that's not really in space. Like, they know better, but they don't know no better, but they just take the money and take a check. They're not running around telling everybody like it's a lie.
Sure, that's a bit of professional fraud, I guess, but I think the deeper evil here is academic fraud. This is the formational years of all these people who are going to fill those seats in their careers, and it's something we just should not tolerate any longer. We need to expose it. And exactly the way I just did. These people love to talk about formulae. They love to talk about measurements they've never taken, and they never take the time to quantify. And when they do, these are the problems we run into. And he says, "Oh yes, I that's a basic thing I encountered in high school. We dealt with that with my teacher," he says. but I don't think he understood it even back then. And he still doesn't understand it. It's clear.
I wish he was in a position to teach and be open about things. I've had some open teachers who may have taught me something, but necessarily didn't align with it behind the scenes. So yeah, if there were more teachers that would be honest and open to both positions or multiple positions, that would be great.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, I will testify that in my own academic path through university, um, the teachers, the professors that I remember are the ones who gave me the straight goods outside of class. Even when it comes to music composition, believe it, guys, even in that arena. I mean, I took a lot of physics and hydrology and geography and geophysics and astronomy and astrophysics, and I took all that stuff as non-musical electives as a part of my degree, to the point where I went in to get my course approval for fourth year. And the guy assigned to me was this prof who works in Asian studies. He had never seen a transcript like mine. In fact, he didn't look at it to begin with. He looked at the courses I wanted to take first, and his initial reaction is just to look up at me wide-eyed and says, "You can take these courses?" And I said, "Okay, go to page 2 and you'll see the answers yes and why and how my grades are." He's like, "Well, okay." And he rubber stamped me because that's how the process goes. There is no discernment. It's you jump through the hoop, you get your skin. And it literally is criminal.
I definitely want to hear Alan's take on that exchange. I'm sure he was listening. But excuse me, one thing I wanted to highlight is when you put his feet to the fire to address the values that are in question, he goes stalemate. One thing I like about Franco, he may not lie, but he won't tell the truth. I know that I'm splitting hairs. Not telling the truth is
That's a
straight up
great
lying.
observation. Yeah.
Yeah, he will stay there, and he started glitching, and then he bailed. He won't lie, which is not as great, but hey, it's better than nothing. What's up, Alan? What's good, kid?
Yo, I put a link to Stone's video in the jumbo. That was an excellent conversation. And yeah, as Stone was saying, where they hide it in the math is the reference frame transformation. And they say, like, well, that's where the dynamics of the forces would be, just trust us, right? Because you can't feel it in your reference frame. And that's like the whole back and forth that's been going on with me and him. Like every time I make a post, he he jumps on something regarding that, and I'm just like, where's your velocity measurement though, dude? And there's just none exist. And that's the whole crux of it, man. And then it goes all the way back to dudes putting water in telescopes, man. Like, it's cool that we have all this math to describe these things, but when it comes to the dynamics of it, the actual mechanisms are non-existent. So like when they applied these equations to the sky, it was still kinematics, and they just told everyone it was dynamics. And they built an entire worldview on that. They built an entire industry on that, guys. So
They did. And I think the single point to come away with in looking at the dynamics, and I mean interpersonal dynamics here between us, him and me when we were talking, is that he was all fine and dandy to argue, all fine and dandy to dismiss what I'm saying with a wave of the hand. But as soon as we started to approach the moral aspect of what's going on here, he disappeared.
If Alan or you, Stone, could possibly give a Steelman for an answer to the question that was never given, what would you think he would say to answer my question? I asked him, what's the analogy? The spokes on a wheel that's rotating, heading in the bike's direction. Why is that not accelerating? Because you can put that bike in a stationary gym reference frame. What do you think he would say? Of course, he
I'd be
bailed.
glad to handle that. Yeah, he actually did hint at it when he brought up the bicycle wheel. I'll deal with the proportional incongruity in a second, but he said that every time the tire hits the ground, its velocity goes to zero, which is true, but its accelerational component never changed because the velocity of the bike isn't changing. The rotational speed of the tire itself around the axle isn't changing. And it is entirely a different set of vectors that you're adding. And again, reference frame is everything in this case. What he's missing there is that as the that point on the tire leaves the ground, it's experiencing double, I guess you would think. It's like +2 -2 in terms of the sign function we're assigning to the accelerational force. But it's not. It's the velocity with respect to the ground that's changing by +2 -2 just to keep up with the bike. When the piece of tire that leaves the road starts swinging up and goes past up top, it's actually going twice the speed of the bike, right? So acceleration is double what you would expect it to be relative to the velocity of the bike. And this is what he's missing when we go to the astronomical scale.
Well done.
Damn, that was a great breakdown.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking that question, Xavier. Thanks for answering it, Stone. That was great.
My absolute pleasure. Hey, let's just call this my first Saturday cameo. I got some other things to do. I got an email to write for somebody who wants me to help him build a laser and some other stuff. Duty calls, you know it is. But this is ironically 12 hours from my last exit.
Yeah. Peace, man. Thanks for coming by.
Too funny. So yeah, have a good time, guys, and we'll catch you on the other spin.
Appreciate you, Stone.